I hired a cleaning lady when no one was supposed to be home. An hour later, she called me, whispering, "Sir, is there someone else in your house?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "I hear breathing inside the walls and I smell smoke." I shouted, "Get out now," and called the police. But what they found, or rather what they did not find, was the beginning of a nightmare that would force me to dismantle my own home brick by brick, just to prove I was not losing my mind. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a man's home should be his fortress, not his prison. My name is Harrison Blake. I am 78 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life designing the skylines of Chicago. I know about structural integrity. I know about load-bearing walls, and I know when the foundation of a life is cracking. That Saturday started at the Oakwood Country Club, a place I despise but visit weekly because my wife Lydia insists it keeps up appearances. I was standing on the 14th green staring at a ball I had no interest in hitting when my phone vibrated against my hip. It was Maria, the woman who cleans my house on weekends. I frowned. Lydia was at a spa in Lake Geneva for the weekend, and I was not supposed to be home until 5. The house should have been empty. When I answered, Maria did not say hello. She was hyperventilating. "Mr. Blake, you need to come home. Please." Her voice was so low it was barely audible over the wind. I asked her what was wrong. She said I was dusting the library. The door to the basement was open. I closed it when I got here. But it is open again. And I hear them. Them. Plural. My grip tightened on the putter until my knuckles turned white. I asked her who she heard. She said, "People. Laughing. Whatever they are doing down there, it sounds like a party. And the smell, Mr. Blake. It smells like mint tobacco." My stomach dropped. I told her to listen to me carefully. I told her to leave the vacuum, leave everything, and walk out the front door immediately. Do not run. Do not look back. Just get to your car and lock the doors. As soon as she hung up, I dialed 911. My hands were shaking not from age, but from a cold, sharp rage. I ran to the parking lot, ignoring the confused looks of my golf partners. I threw my clubs into the back of my Cadillac and tore out of the parking lot, leaving skid marks on their pristine asphalt. As I merged onto the highway, my mind was racing faster than the engine. It was impossible. It should have been physically impossible for anyone to be in that house. I designed the security myself, the Sentinel Mark IV system. It cost me $50,000. It has motion sensors in every corridor, pressure sensors on the windowsills, and a silent alarm that trips if the glass is even vibrated at a certain frequency. If a squirrel sneezes on my patio, I get a notification on my phone. But my phone was silent. No alarm. No breach notification. Nothing. That meant only one thing. Whoever was inside had the code. And only 3 people on this earth had that code. Me, my wife Lydia, and her son Preston. Preston. The name tasted like bile in my throat. My 40-year-old stepson who claimed to be a cryptocurrency entrepreneur, but in reality had not earned a legitimate paycheck since the Obama administration. But Preston was supposed to be in Florida looking for investors. And Lydia was at a spa. The math did not add up. I pushed the Cadillac to 80 miles per hour. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I arrived at my driveway at the exact same moment as 2 squad cars. The sirens were deafening, cutting through the quiet Saturday afternoon of our gated community. I saw Maria standing by her Honda Civic, shivering, her face pale. I jumped out of the car and ran to the lead officer. I told him I am the owner. My name is Harrison Blake. There are intruders inside. The officer, a young man who looked like he had barely started shaving, nodded and signaled his partner. They drew their weapons. I watched them approach the front door of the house I had built with my own money, the house I had designed to be my sanctuary. They found the front door unlocked. Maria swore she had locked it when she fled. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I wanted to go in with them. I wanted to tear whoever was in there apart with my bare hands. But the officer held up a hand and told me to stay back for my own safety. I stood there on the lawn feeling the heat of the afternoon sun, feeling utterly helpless. I watched the windows. I waited for the sound of gunshots or shouting or the crash of furniture. I waited to see Preston being dragged out in handcuffs, or perhaps some local burglars who had managed to hack the system. I waited for 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. The silence was heavier than the sirens had been. Finally, the front door opened. The officers holstered their weapons. They walked towards me, their body language relaxed. Too relaxed. The young officer took off his cap and wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked at me, and then he looked at Maria, and then back at me. "Mr. Blake," he said, "we cleared the house. Basement, attic, all 6 bedrooms. We even checked the garage and the pool house." I stared at him. I asked him where they were. He shook his head. "There is no one there, sir. No sign of forced entry. No sign of a struggle. The house is empty." I felt the blood rush to my face. I told him that was impossible. I told him about the phone call. I pointed at Maria. She heard them. She heard laughing. She smelled smoke. The officer gave me a look I have seen too many times in the last few years. It is a look reserved for toddlers and the elderly, a look of patronizing pity. He said, "Sir, sometimes acoustics in these big houses can be tricky. Pipes settling, HVAC systems. And the cleaning lady, well, maybe she got spooked." I stepped closer to him. I drew myself up to my full height. I am 6'2", and I still have the posture of a man who commanded construction sites with hundreds of workers. I told him, "I know every inch of that house. I know what settling pipes sound like. And pipes do not smoke menthol cigarettes." The officer sighed. He pulled out a notepad. "Mr. Blake, look. We found no cigarette butts, no ashes, no muddy footprints. The alarm system was disarmed from the inside panel using a valid code. That stopped me cold. Disarmed from the inside." He continued, his voice dropping an octave, trying to be gentle. "Is it possible you forgot to arm it when you left? Or maybe you gave the code to someone else and forgot?" "My grandfather. He gets a little confused sometimes in the late afternoon. It is nothing to be ashamed of." There it was, the insult wrapped in kindness. He thought I was senile. He thought I was a confused old man who had panicked over a draft in the hallway. I looked at Maria. She looked terrified, terrified that she would lose her job, terrified that she was wrong. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She had not imagined it. I thanked the officers. My voice was ice cold. I told them I was sorry for wasting their time. I watched them get back into their cars. I watched the neighbors peeking out from behind their curtains, whispering. Poor Harrison, losing his marbles, just like his father. When the police left, I walked into my house. The silence was oppressive. It smelled of lemon polish and stale air. I walked to the living room. Everything was perfect. The cushions were fluffed. The rug was aligned. It looked like a showroom. It looked innocent. But then I knelt down. I went to the spot near the basement door where Maria said she had heard the voices. I put my face close to the floorboards. The police said there was no smell. And they were right, the air freshener was overwhelming. But I closed my eyes and focused. I have the nose of a bloodhound. And underneath the scent of lemon and old wood, I caught it. Faint. Almost imperceptible. But undeniable. The sharp chemical tang of mint tobacco. And something else. A smell I recognized from my construction days. The smell of fresh drywall dust. I stood up. My knees popped a reminder of my age. But my mind was sharp as a razor. Someone had been here. Someone who knew the code. Someone who knew how to clean up in less than 10 minutes. And the police thought I was crazy. My neighbors thought I was crazy. Even Maria was starting to doubt herself. But I knew the truth. I walked over to the security panel. The log showed the system was disarmed at 2:00 p.m. That was when I was on the golf course. It was rearmed at 2:45 p.m. and then disarmed again when I walked in. 45 minutes. Someone had 45 minutes inside my home. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was trembling, and I slammed the glass down on the granite counter to stop it. I was not going to let them win. I was not going to let them gaslight me into an assisted living facility. I picked up my phone and called Lydia. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Lydia, leave a message." Her voice sounded so sweet, so innocent. I hung up. Then I called Preston. It rang and rang. Finally, he picked up. "Hey, Harrison," he said. His voice was loud, breathless, background noise of wind. "What's up? I'm kind of in the middle of a meeting here in Miami." I asked him if he was in Miami. He laughed. "Yeah, South Beach. Investors love the sun." "Why you sound tense?" I told him about the police. I told him about the break-in. There was a pause. A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "Oh my God," Preston said. "Is everything okay?" "Did they take anything?" I told him nothing was taken. "That is weird," he said. "Maybe it was just a glitch, Harrison. You know how you get with technology. Maybe you should get the system checked. Or maybe you need to rest more. Mom says you have been stressing out lately." There it was again. The seed of doubt. The suggestion that I was the broken one, not the security system. The blue lights of the police cruisers had barely faded from my driveway when the distinct growl of a Mercedes engine cut through the silence. It was Lydia. She was home hours earlier than she said she would be. A coincidence. In my line of work, we call that a structural anomaly. Things do not just happen ahead of schedule unless someone is pushing them. I watched through this bay window as she slammed the car door, not with the grace of a woman returning from a relaxing spa weekend, but with the frantic energy of someone arriving at a crime scene she helped orchestrate. She marched up the front steps, her heels clicking on the stone like a countdown. When she burst through the front door, she did not hug me. She did not ask if I was hurt. She threw her designer handbag onto the entryway table with enough force to rattle the vase of fresh lilies. "Harrison, what on earth is going on?" Her voice was shrill, peeling paint off the walls. I drove past the Hendersons, and they were staring at our house like it was on fire. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have police cars parked on our lawn?" On a Saturday afternoon, I stood there leaning against the doorframe of the living room, feeling the adrenaline from the intrusion turn into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I told her calmly that someone had been in the house. I told her about Maria's call. I told her about the smell of smoke and the noises in the basement. Lydia stopped pacing and looked at me. Her expression shifted instantly. The anger melted away, replaced by that suffocating, pitying concern that I had grown to hate more than her rage. She walked over and placed a hand on my arm. Her palm was damp. "Harrison, honey, listen to yourself. Maria is a sweet woman, but she is nearly 70. She forgets which day of the week it is half the time. And you, well, you have been under a lot of stress lately with the market volatility." I pulled my arm away. "I am not stressed, Lydia. And Maria is not senile. Someone was here." Lydia sighed a long, dramatic exhale that signaled she was dealing with a stubborn child. She walked into the living room and gestured around. "Look at this room, Harrison. It is spotless. I had the carpets deep cleaned on Thursday. If someone had been smoking or partying down here, do you think I wouldn't smell it? You are imagining things, just like your father did towards the end. Remember when he thought the nurses were stealing his silverware? That low blow hit its mark. My father's dementia had been a slow, agonizing erasure of a brilliant mind. Lydia knew it was my greatest fear. She was weaponizing my genetics against me. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. Maybe she was right. Maybe the silence of the house was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just an old man raging at shadows. I rubbed my temples, knocking my reading glasses off the side table. They clattered onto the hardwood floor, sliding partially under the Italian leather sofa. I let out a groan of frustration. "I am sorry, Lydia," I muttered. "Maybe I am just tired. I will call the Hendersons and apologize for the disturbance." I knelt down to retrieve my glasses. My knees popped loudly in the quiet room. I reached under the sofa, my hand sweeping across the cool wood floor. My fingers brushed against the frames of my glasses. But then they hit something else. Something small, hard, and metallic. I froze. I pulled my hand back, concealing the object in my palm. I stood up, adjusting my glasses on my nose, and turned my back to Lydia so she could not see what I was holding. I pretended to wipe a smudge off the lens, but I was looking at the object in my hand. It was a hoop earring. But not just any earring. It was gold-plated, the cheap kind, where the gold flakes off if you look at it too hard, revealing the dull gray metal underneath. I squinted. There was a tiny discoloration on the clasp, a spot of green oxidation. Lydia only wore 18-karat gold or platinum. She was allergic to cheap metals. They made her earlobes swell. This piece of junk did not belong to her. And it certainly did not belong to Maria, who wore simple pearl studs her grandmother gave her. My mind flashed back to 3 months ago. Thanksgiving dinner. Preston had brought his wife Monica. I remembered sitting across from her trying to make polite conversation while she complained about the cost of living in the city. I remembered watching her eat, noting the way she chewed with her mouth slightly open. And I remembered the jewelry she was wearing. Large gold-plated hoops that swung back and forth every time she laughed at one of Preston's bad jokes. I clenched my fist around the earring. The metal dug into my skin, a sharp grounding pain. This was not a hallucination. This was not dementia. This was evidence. Monica had been here. My daughter-in-law had been under my sofa. I turned back to Lydia. She was watching me closely, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of resistance. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a tired, defeated smile. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to build, harder than any cantilevered balcony or suspension bridge. "You are right, Lydia," I said, my voice deliberately shaky. "I need to rest. I think I will go lie down for a bit before dinner." She exhaled, visibly relieved. The tension left her shoulders. "That sounds like a good idea, Harrison. I will make you some tea. Chamomile. It will help you calm down." I nodded and walked towards the stairs, my hand still clenched tight in my pocket. As I climbed the steps, I could feel her eyes on my back. She was probably already texting Preston, telling him the coast was clear, telling him the old man had bought the lie. I went into my study and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and placed the cheap earring on the green blotter. It looked pathetic sitting there against the expensive leather, a piece of trash that had unraveled a multi-million-dollar conspiracy. I opened my laptop, but I did not log into my bank accounts. Not yet. I navigated to the Neighborhood Homeowners Association portal. I was on the Architectural Review Board for 20 years. I knew exactly which houses on our street had recently upgraded their security systems. The Hendersons across the street had installed a 360-degree perimeter camera last month. The Millers 2 doors down had a doorbell camera that faced the street. My own security system might have been compromised, bypassed by a traitor with the code. But the street. The public road leading up to my driveway. They could not hack that. They could not erase the digital footprint of their arrival. I began typing an email to Bob Henderson. Subject: architectural query. I kept it professional, casual. "Bob, hope you are well. I am thinking of upgrading to the same camera system you installed. The resolution looks fantastic. Would you mind sending me a sample clip from today?" Maybe around 100 p.m. to 300 p.m. I want to see how it handles the afternoon glare. I hit send. My heart was hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a war drum. Lydia thought she had put the fire out. She thought she had smothered my suspicions with a warm cup of chamomile tea and a gaslighting speech. But she forgot who she was dealing with. You do not survive 40 years in the Chicago construction business by being soft. You survive by noticing the hairline cracks before the building collapses. You survive by trusting your gut when everyone else tells you the blueprints are perfect. I looked at the earring one last time. Then I opened my bottom drawer and dropped it into a small plastic Ziploc bag I used for screws. I labeled it Exhibit A. Downstairs, I heard the clinking of a spoon against a ceramic mug. Lydia was making the tea. Poisoned, sedated. Or just plain tea meant to lull me into a false sense of security. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to drink it. The phone on my desk buzzed. It was a reply from Bob Henderson. Sure thing, Harrison. Sending the cloud link now. Funny you ask, I saw a white van parked down the street earlier today. Didn't look like a delivery truck. A white van. I clicked the link. The video feed loaded, buffering for a second that felt like an eternity. And then there it was. Crystal clear 4K video. At 1:15 p.m., a white cargo van with no license plates pulled up to the curb 3 houses down. 2 figures got out. They were wearing gray coveralls and carrying tool bags. They looked like maintenance workers. But as they walked past the Hendersons' camera, one of them looked up. It was Preston. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but I would recognize that weak chin anywhere. And walking next to him, struggling with a heavy duffel bag that looked suspiciously like it contained camping gear, was Monica. They didn't walk to the front door. They walked around the side of my property towards the blind spot in my fence that leads to the basement window well. The window well I had designed to be wide enough for an emergency exit. I paused the video. I zoomed in on Preston's face. He was smiling. A smirk of anticipation. I sat back in my chair, the cold light of the monitor illuminating the dark room. The puzzle pieces were slamming into place with the force of a pile driver. They hadn't just broken in. They had moved in. That duffel bag wasn't for a robbery. It was for a stay. I looked at the timestamp. They had entered at 1:18 p.m. Maria called me at 2:05 p.m. That meant they had been in my house in my basement for nearly an hour before Maria heard them, doing what installing cameras, rifling through my files, or setting up their little nest in the walls. A knock at the door made me jump. Harrison Lydia's voice was soft, muffled by the wood. "I have your tea." I closed the laptop lid gently. "Just a minute, dear," I called out. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. "I am just changing my shirt." I stood up and walked to the door. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked old. My hair was white, my face lined with wrinkles. But my eyes were burning with a cold blue fire. I unlocked the door and opened it. Lydia was standing there with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She smiled, a perfect, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Here you go," she said. "Drink this while it is hot. It will help you sleep." I took the mug. "Thank you, Lydia," I said. "You are too good to me." I watched her walk back down the hall, her hips swaying. She thought she was the predator. She thought I was the prey. She had no idea that she had just locked herself in a cage with a lion who was finally fully awake. I walked into the bathroom and poured the tea down the sink. I turned on the tap to wash it away, watching the amber liquid swirl down the drain. Then I went back into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited for night to fall. The hunt had officially begun. The sun had barely breached the horizon when the doorbell rang. It was not the polite, hesitant chime of a delivery driver or a neighbor returning a borrowed tool. It was a sustained, demanding ring, the kind that insists on being answered immediately. I was already awake, sitting in my wingback chair by the window, watching the street like a sentinel. I watched as a black SUV idled in my driveway, its trunk popped open like a hungry mouth. I walked downstairs, my slippers scuffing softly against the marble foyer. When I opened the door, the morning air rushed in cold and biting, but not nearly as chilling as the sight of my stepson Preston and his wife Monica standing on my welcome mat. They were flanked by 3 large suitcases, not overnight bags. Suitcases, the kind you pack when you are planning to relocate your entire life. "Dad!" Preston exclaimed, his voice pitched a little too high, a little too cheerful for 7 in the morning. "We were so worried about you after that scare yesterday. Mom called us in a panic. We could not just sit in our apartment, knowing you were here feeling unsafe." Monica stepped forward, her perfume hitting me like a chemical weapon. It was a cloying floral scent that tried to mask the smell of stale cigarettes I knew clung to her hair. "We are here to help Harrison. We are going to take care of everything so you do not have to lift a finger. We are going to be your live-in support system until you are back on your feet." I looked at the suitcases. Then I looked at Preston. I wanted to tell him that I was not off my feet. I wanted to tell him that the only thing making me feel unsafe was the fact that he was standing on my porch. But I remembered the game plan. I remembered the cheap earring in the plastic bag upstairs. If I kicked them out now, they would just scurry back into the shadows and plot something worse. I needed them close. I needed them where I could see them. I forced a weak, grateful smile. "That is very kind of you," I said. "I suppose the house has felt a little big lately." Lydia appeared at the top of the stairs, tying her silk robe. She acted surprised, bringing a hand to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "Preston, Monica. What are you doing here?" "We came for Harrison, Mum," Preston said, dragging the first heavy suitcase across the threshold. The wheels rumbled on the marble like a tank rolling into occupied territory. "We are not going to let him go through this senility. I mean this stress alone." I caught the slip. Senility. That was the narrative they were building. They were not moving in to protect me. They were moving in to curate my decline. Breakfast was a chaotic affair. Monica took over the kitchen immediately. She moved my coffee maker, reorganized the spice rack, and started cooking bacon with a ferocity that sent grease spattering onto the pristine granite countertops I had selected personally from a quarry in Italy. I sat at the island, clutching my mug, watching my sanctuary be colonized. Every time I tried to stand up to get a spoon or a napkin, Monica would rush over. "No, Dad, sit down. Let me get it. You need to preserve your energy." They were treating me like an invalid. It was a subtle form of imprisonment. By removing my need to do anything, they were removing my agency. The real attack, however, did not come until dinner. We sat in the formal dining room, a space I usually reserved for holidays. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the table, but the atmosphere was ice cold. Preston was cutting his steak with aggressive sawing motions. He took a bite, chewed quickly, and then set his knife down. He cleared his throat. "You know, Dad," he started, not looking me in the eye, but focusing on the centerpiece. "I have been looking at the markets lately. Things are getting volatile. Inflation, geopolitical tension. It is a nightmare for traditional portfolios." I took a slow sip of water. I waited. I knew exactly where this was going. I was thinking. Preston continued, gaining confidence. "It might be too much for you to manage right now. Checking the tickers, moving assets, dealing with brokers. It is a young man's game. I have been doing really well with my own investments lately. High-yield tech stocks, crypto diversification. I could take that burden off your shoulders." Lydia chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It does make sense, Harrison. You have worked so hard your whole life. Why not let Preston handle the paperwork? He is so good with numbers." I looked at Preston. This was the man who claimed to be a financial wizard. But I have friends. I have friends who run the biggest banks in Chicago. I have friends who play golf with the very people Preston claims to emulate. And I knew for a fact that last month my stepson had liquidated his 401k to buy into a speculative cryptocurrency that crashed 48 hours later. He had incinerated $200,000 money he and Monica probably needed for their mortgage in a single weekend. And now he wanted the keys to my $8 million portfolio. He wanted power of attorney. It was the golden ticket. Once he had that, he could drain my accounts, sell my stocks, and refinance this house without me signing a single page. He could legally rob me blind while I sat in the corner drooling. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and placed it on the table. I looked Preston dead in the eye. "That is a generous offer, Preston," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I actually find the market quite stimulating. It keeps my mind sharp. I built this portfolio the same way I built the Willis Tower renovation, brick by brick, calculation by calculation. I think I will keep my hand on the wheel for now." The silence that followed was deafening. Preston's jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek twitched. Monica stopped eating her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. They exchanged a look, a quick, sharp glance that conveyed panic and anger. This was not part of their script. The old man was supposed to be confused. He was supposed to be grateful. But Dad Preston pressed his voice, hardening. "If your health declines, if you have another episode like yesterday—" "There was no episode, Preston," I cut him off. "Just a security anomaly. And as for my health, I feel fantastic." Lydia reached out and touched my hand. "Harrison, we are just thinking of your future." "So am I." "Lydia," I said. "So am I." I excused myself from the table. I needed to get away from their suffocating stares. I needed to breathe air that didn't smell of deception. I told them I was going to the library to read, but instead I made my way to the wine cellar in the basement. The basement was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the heated tension upstairs. This was my favorite room in the house. I had designed the racking system myself, creating a climate-controlled vault for over 1,000 bottles of wine. Some of them I had collected 30 years ago. They were not just beverages. They were memories. Investments. I walked to the back row, to the section reserved for French Bordeaux. My eyes scanned the labels until they landed on the crown jewel of my collection. A bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1995. It was worth nearly $1,000. I had been saving it for my 80th birthday. I reached out and took the bottle from the rack. The glass felt cold in my hand, but something was wrong. I ran my thumb over the foil capsule at the neck of the bottle. It was slightly wrinkled. When you buy a bottle of this caliber, the foil is smooth, tight, perfect. This looked like it had been peeled back and then smoothed over by a nervous hand. I held the bottle up to the light. The cork. It sat a fraction of a millimeter too low in the neck. My heart began to hammer against my ribs again. I walked over to the tasting table where I kept a corkscrew. With trembling hands, I drove the screw into the cork and pulled. It came out too easily. A cork that has been in a bottle for 20 years should fight you. It should be swollen with age. This cork felt loose. I poured a small amount of the dark red liquid into a tasting glass. I swirled it. The color was right, a deep garnet. But the legs, the way the wine dripped down the side of the glass, it was too thin, too watery. I lifted the glass to my nose. I expected the complex aroma of black currants, truffle, and cedar. Instead, I smelled sugar and cheap ethanol. I took a sip. I did not swallow. I let it sit on my tongue for a second, before spitting it into the sink. It was grape juice. Welch's grape juice spiked with cheap vodka to give it a burn. I stared at the sink, watching the purple liquid swirl away. They had drunk it. They had come into my house, into my sanctuary, and they had consumed my most prized possession. And then with the arrogance of teenagers, they had filled the bottle with swill, thinking the old man would never know the difference, thinking my palate was as dead as my brain. It was a violation deeper than the stolen money. Money is just numbers. This was personal. This was them laughing at me. This was them erasing me. To them, I was already a ghost in my own house. They were eating my food, spending my future, and drinking my past. I recorked the bottle and placed it back on the rack. I turned the label slightly outward, just a few degrees off-center. A marker. I stood there in the silence of the cellar, listening to the muffled sounds of footsteps above my head. Preston was probably pacing. Monica was probably complaining about my stubbornness. Lydia was probably trying to calm them down. They thought they were the invasion force. They thought they had breached the castle walls and were just waiting for the king to die. But they forgot one thing. I built this castle. I know where the trapdoors are. I know where the load-bearing walls are. And I know exactly how to bring the roof down on their heads without getting a speck of dust on my suit. I turned off the cellar light, plunging the room into darkness. Upstairs, the parasites were planning their next move. But down here in the dark, the architect was already drafting the demolition plan. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of bacon and deception. I walked in to find Monica standing by the island, wearing an apron that belonged to my wife, holding a small plastic cup filled with water and a single oblong blue pill. She had that professional smile plastered on her face, the one she probably used on customers at the pharmacy right before she told them their insurance wouldn't cover their insulin. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped the word dad, sounding foreign and sharp coming from her mouth. "You slept late." I was getting worried. I wasn't sleeping late. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, waiting for them to make a move. I pulled out a stool and sat down, my movements deliberate and slow. I had to play the part. The tired old man, the confused patriarch. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the pill. Monica slid the cup across the granite counter. "It is a new cognitive supplement," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Preston told me you have been having some trouble with memory lately. You know, forgetting where you put things, hearing noises. I called a colleague of mine, a top neurologist. He recommended this. It is a high-dose nootropic. It helps with blood flow to the brain." I looked at the pill. It looked innocent enough. Just a piece of compressed powder. But coming from the woman who had lived in my walls, it might as well have been a grenade. "I don't need pills, Monica," I grumbled, pushing it away. "I have never taken anything stronger than aspirin in my life." Lydia walked in, then carrying a pot of coffee. "Harrison, please," she said, pouring me a cup. "Do it for us. We are all so worried about you. If this helps you feel more like yourself, isn't it worth a try?" I looked at Lydia, then at Monica. They were a team. Good cop, bad cop, or rather poisoner and enabler. If I refused, they would just crush it up and put it in my soup later. I knew that. I had to make them think they had won. "Fine," I said. I picked up the pill. I put it in my mouth. I took a swig of water. I tilted my head back. I made a swallowing motion, feeling the dry tablet sitting on top of my tongue. Then I let out a violent, hacking cough. "Wrong pipe," I wheezed, covering my mouth with my handkerchief. I hunched over, shaking, pretending to struggle for air. In that moment of chaos, while Lydia rushed to pat my back, and Monica looked on with a mixture of annoyance and alarm, I spit the pill into the folds of the white cotton cloth. I took another drink of water, actually swallowing this time. I wiped my mouth carefully, folding the handkerchief so the pill was trapped inside, and stuffed it into my pocket. "That went down hard," I rasped. "Be careful, Dad," Monica said, and for a second I saw a flash of disappointment in her eyes. She wanted that pill in my system. She needed it in my system. I excused myself after finishing my coffee, claiming I needed to review some old blueprints in my study. As soon as I was inside the room, I locked the door. I turned the deadbolt slowly so it wouldn't click loudly enough for them to hear. I moved to my desk and turned on the green banker's lamp. I pulled the handkerchief from my pocket and unfolded it. The blue pill sat there slightly damp but intact. I opened my top drawer and took out my magnifying glass. It was a heavy brass instrument, a relic from the days before CAD software, when I used to examine structural drawings by hand. I held the lens over the pill. Monica said it was a supplement. Supplements usually have simple markings or logos. This pill had a code stamped into it. 2 letters, 3 numbers. I pulled my laptop toward me. I opened a private browsing window. My fingers flew across the keys. I was not just an architect. I was a researcher. You don't build skyscrapers without knowing how to verify your materials. I typed the code into a pill identifier database. The search wheel spun for a second. The result popped up on the screen. It was not a vitamin. It was not a nootropic. It was not for blood flow. It was a generic form of a heavy-duty antipsychotic, a sedative used for schizophrenia and acute mania in bipolar disorder. I scrolled down to the side effects. The list was long and terrifying. Drowsiness, dizziness, muscle tremors, confusion, memory loss, difficulty speaking, and in elderly patients with no history of psychosis, increased risk of heart failure and sudden death. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just poison. It was a chemical lobotomy. If I took this every day within a week, I would be stumbling around the house slurring my words. I wouldn't remember conversations. I would sleep 18 hours a day. I would look for all intents and purposes like a man in the advanced stages of dementia. I sat back in my leather chair, the room suddenly feeling very small. I looked at the family photos on the shelf. Why? Why go to this length? Why not just push me down the stairs? Then it clicked. The dinner conversation from the night before. Preston asking for power of attorney. If I died suddenly, there would be an autopsy. There would be questions. But if I slowly lost my mind, if I became incapacitated, I opened a new tab and searched for Illinois state laws regarding power of attorney. I read the fine print. The power activates immediately upon the determination of incapacity by a physician. That was the plan. They didn't just want to steal my money. They wanted to steal me. They wanted to parade me in front of a doctor, probably the same crooked friend who prescribed these pills while I was drugged out of my mind. The doctor would certify that Harrison Blake was no longer competent to handle his own affairs. Preston would get the signature, and then they would control everything. My bank accounts, my properties, my medical decisions. They could dump me in a state-run nursing home to rot while they lived in my house and spent my millions. They could sell my life's work for pennies on the dollar. And legally, I wouldn't be able to stop them because I would be the crazy old man who needed to be medicated for his own safety. I looked at the blue pill again. It was a bullet. A silent, slow-moving bullet aimed right at my cerebral cortex. I felt a surge of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I could not afford to be sick. I wrapped the pill in a piece of Scotch tape and stuck it to the underside of my desk drawer right next to the bag with the earring. They wanted a vegetable. They wanted a confused, compliant old man. I would give them one. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the corner of the study. I practiced. I let my jaw go slack. I let my eyelids droop. I practiced a vacant stare, the look of a man whose lights are on, but nobody is home. I would take their vitamins, or at least they would think I did. I would let them see the decline. I would let them get confident. I would let them think the drug was working until they were so sure of their victory that they got careless. Because the most dangerous thing in a building isn't the crack you can see. It is the pressure building up in the foundation that you ignore until the moment the whole thing comes down. I unlocked the study door and shuffled out into the hallway, dragging my feet just a little. I feel a bit foggy. Monica? I called out, my voice slightly slurred. I heard her footsteps coming from the kitchen. Fast. Eager. "That is normal, Dad," she said, appearing with a smile that was now genuinely happy. "That just means the medicine is starting to work." "Oh yes, Monica. It is working. Just not the way you think." I told Monica I needed to pick up a prescription for my blood pressure. She offered to go for me, of course, her eyes scanning my face for any sign that the blue pill was taking effect. I let my hand tremble as I reached for my car keys. I told her that I needed to get out of the house, that the walls were feeling a little too close. That was the only honest thing I said to her all morning. She reluctantly agreed, but stood in the driveway watching me until I turned the corner, her silhouette framed by the front door, like a prison warden, ensuring the inmate was only going to the exercise yard. As soon as I was out of sight, the tremor in my hand vanished. I straightened my posture and gripped the steering wheel of my Cadillac with the firmness of a man half my age. I checked the rearview mirror constantly. No tail. They were arrogant. They thought the drugs had already turned my brain into mush. They didn't think I was capable of deception. That was their mistake. I drove 3 towns over, taking a circuitous route that doubled back on itself twice just to be sure. I pulled into the parking lot of a megamart in a working-class neighborhood miles away from the manicured lawns of my gated community. I parked in the back row next to a rusted pickup truck that looked like it had seen combat. Inside that truck sat Jack. Jack was a man carved out of granite. He was a former Marine recon sniper who had pivoted to private investigation after the service. I had hired him years ago to investigate a foreman who was skimming materials from a job site, and we had maintained a quiet, professional respect ever since. He didn't ask questions about morality. He only cared about the facts. I climbed into the passenger seat of his truck. The cab smelled of stale coffee and rain. Jack didn't say hello. He just nodded, his eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses, even though it was overcast. "You look like hell, Harrison," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I feel like hell, Jack," I replied. I told him everything. I told him about the voices in the basement, the cheap earring, the fake wine, and the blue pill that was currently taped to the underside of my desk. Jack listened without interrupting. He stared out the windshield, his jaw set. When I finished, he took a slow drag from a cigarette he hadn't lit yet. "So they are drugging you," he said flatly. "That changes the playbook. This isn't just theft anymore. It is assault. Maybe attempted murder." "I know," I said, "but I can't prove intent yet. If I go to the police now, it is my word against theirs, and they have the narrative that I am senile. I need hard evidence. I need to hear them saying it." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a hand-drawn schematic. "Jack," I said, unfolding the paper on the dashboard. "You know I designed that house. I didn't just pick out the drapes. I engineered the airflow, the structural loads, the acoustics. I pointed to a narrow vertical shaft, drawn in red ink, located between the master suite and the guest room where Preston and Monica were staying. When I built the place, I installed a service chase here. It runs from the basement foundation all the way to the attic. It houses the main plumbing stack and the HVAC return. It is wide enough for a man to shimmy up if he had to, but it is meant for pipes." Jack looked at the drawing, raising an eyebrow. So I continued, "The walls of that chase are not insulated like the rest of the house. I wanted easy access for repairs. That means it acts like a giant ear trumpet. If you are in the basement near the access panel, you can hear a toilet flush on the second floor. But if you are in the attic," I tapped the top of the drawing. "If you are in the attic right here where the chase vents out, the acoustics are perfect. It amplifies sound from the adjoining rooms. Preston's room shares a wall with this chase. If they are talking in there, the sound travels right up the vent." I looked at Jack. "I need you to get ears in that attic." "I can't do it. The attic access is in the hallway, and the ladder is noisy. If I try to go up there, they will hear me. I need high-gain microphones dropped down that shaft from the roof or installed in the attic vents from the outside." Jack studied the schematic for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I can do it," he said. "I have laser microphones that can pick up vibrations off window glass from 200 yards away, but if they have the blinds closed, it is unreliable. The vent is better. I can come in tonight through the roof. I will rappel from the tree line on the west side. They won't hear a thing. I will drop a wire down that shaft and hook it up to a remote transmitter. You will be able to listen to them live on a secure frequency." "Good," I said. "I want to know every word they say. I want to know when they sneeze." Jack folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Then he reached behind his seat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He dropped it heavily onto my lap. "We will get the audio," Jack said. "But you need to see this first. I ran the background check on Preston and Monica you asked for." I looked at the envelope. It felt heavy like a brick. "I assumed they were in debt," I said, reaching for the clasp. "Preston has always been bad with money." "Gambling, credit cards, open it," Jack said. I slid the papers out. The first document was a foreclosure notice from the Cook County Sheriff's Office. It was dated 2 weeks ago. I flipped the page. It was an eviction order. I flipped again. Photos taken by a repo agent showed Preston's luxury SUV being towed away from a curb. Harrison Jack said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They are not just broke. They are destitute. Their condo in the city, the bank took it. They were evicted 14 days ago. All those suitcases they brought to your house, that isn't luggage for a visit. That is everything they own." I stared at the photo of the eviction notice taped to the door of the condo I had helped them pay the down payment on 5 years ago. "They have maxed out 16 credit cards," Jack continued reciting the data from memory. "Preston has a pending lawsuit for a crypto scam he tried to run. They are looking at jail time if they don't pay back investors. And Monica. She was fired from the pharmacy chain last month for inventory discrepancies. Stealing meds." I felt a cold chill settle in the center of my chest. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. This wasn't just greed. Greed is wanting more than you have. This was desperation. This was survival. They didn't come to my house to care for me. They didn't even come just to steal from me. They came because they had nowhere else to go. My house was their lifeboat, and I was the cargo they needed to throw overboard to stay afloat. "They are homeless," I whispered the word, tasting like ash. "They are desperate rats backed into a corner," Jack corrected. "And that makes them dangerous. If they don't get your power of attorney soon, they are going to be on the street. They are on a timeline, Harrison. They can't wait months for you to decline naturally. They need you gone, or they need you controlled right now." I looked up at Jack. The rain had started to streak the windshield, blurring the world outside. "Install the mics, Jack," I said, my voice hard. "Tonight." Jack nodded. "Watch your back, Harrison. If they figure out you know, they won't bother with the pills anymore." I opened the truck door and stepped out into the rain. I didn't run to my car. I walked. I let the cold water soak into my coat. I needed to feel it. I needed to remember that I was alive, that I was real, and that I was still the master of my own domain. I drove back to the house with the envelope hidden under the spare tire in my trunk. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Preston standing by the window watching. He waved. A friendly filial wave. I waved back. "Enjoy the roof over your head while you can, son," I thought, because I am about to bring it down. Walking back into my own house felt like walking onto a stage in the middle of a play I had not rehearsed. I entered through the garage, my footsteps heavy and deliberate, signaling my arrival. As I pushed open the door to the kitchen, the air was thick with tension, a physical weight that pressed against my chest. Lydia Preston and Monica were huddled around the granite island. Their heads were close together, a three-headed hydra of conspiracy. They were whispering, their voices urgent and sharp. But the moment the door clicked shut behind me, the silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was not a natural pause. It was the terrified hush of criminals caught in the act. Preston straightened up so fast he nearly knocked over a glass of water. Monica busied herself with a napkin wiping a spot on the counter that was already clean. And Lydia, my wife of 20 years, turned to me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Harrison," she said, her voice pitched too high. "You are back early. We were just discussing dinner plans." I looked at them. I looked at the way Preston's eyes darted to the side. I looked at the way Monica's hand trembled slightly as she held the napkin. Dinner plans. Right. Just like the invasion of Poland was a travel itinerary. "That sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice flat and tired. "I am feeling a bit nauseous from that medicine. I think I need to use the restroom and then lie down." Lydia's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. Nauseous. That is a common side effect, Harrison. It means your body is adjusting. You should go rest. I nodded and shuffled out of the kitchen, letting my shoulders slump. I played the part of the frazzled, weakening old man perfectly, but inside my heart was hammering a war drum. I went into the powder room on the first floor, the one that shared a ventilation shaft with the kitchen. It was a quirk of the house's design, a way to circulate air efficiently that I had drawn up on a drafting table 30 years ago. Back then, it was about thermal dynamics. Today, it was about survival. I locked the door and turned on the faucet. I let the water run loud and hard, creating a sound barrier against anyone listening outside. Then I moved. I climbed onto the toilet lid, my knees protesting the awkward angle. I reached up to the decorative brass vent cover high on the wall. Usually my arthritis would make this impossible, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. My fingers moved with the dexterity of a man half my age. I used a small coin from my pocket to unscrew the two holding screws. I pulled the grate back just enough to slide my hand inside. The metal ductwork was cool to the touch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the device Jack had given me. It was a high-gain audio recorder no bigger than a matchbox with a magnetic back. I reached deep into the shaft, angling it downward toward the kitchen vent. I felt the magnet click solidly against the sheet metal. I replaced the grate. I tightened the screws. I hopped down from the toilet and stared at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning. I turned off the faucet. The silence returned, but now the walls had ears. My ears. I flushed the toilet for effect and walked out. I told Lydia I was going to my room to sleep. I walked up the stairs, feeling their eyes on my back, burning holes in my jacket. I spent the next 2 hours in my bedroom, sitting in the dark. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly, counting the rotations. 1, 2, 3. Each rotation was a second stolen from the life I thought I had. I waited until the house was completely quiet. I waited until I heard the heavy front door close, signaling that Preston and Monica had gone out to the guest house and Lydia had retired to her suite. Only then did I move. I crept back downstairs, a ghost in my own home. I retrieved the recorder from the bathroom vent with the same stealth I had used to place it. I took it back to my study, locked the door, and plugged it into my laptop. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. I took a deep breath. I was about to hear the truth. I pressed play. The first few minutes were just the sound of running water from when I was in the bathroom. Then the sound of the toilet flushing. Then the door opening and closing. And then the voices began. The audio was crisp, amplified by the metal ductwork. It sounded like they were standing right next to me. "He is looking worse," Preston's voice said. "Did you see how he walked? He is shuffling." "It is the meds," Monica replied. Her voice was cold, clinical. "The sedative effect is cumulative. By tomorrow he won't be able to string a sentence together. We can get the doctor over here by Friday to certify him." I gripped the edge of my desk. They were discussing the destruction of my mind as casually as discussing the weather. "Friday is too late," Preston snapped. The bank called again. "They are threatening to seize the car. We need access to his accounts now." Then a new voice cut through the recording. It was Lydia. "Stop whining, Preston," she hissed. "You will get your money. You just have to stick to the plan." "But he is tough, Mom," Preston argued. "Did you see him this morning? He drove himself to the store. What if the dose isn't high enough? What if he fights it?" There was a pause on the tape. The sound of silverware clinking against china. Then Lydia spoke again. And what she said stopped my heart cold in my chest. "He is an old mule," Lydia said, her voice dripping with a venom I had never heard in 20 years of marriage. "He is stubborn. But he is human. If he is still walking around tomorrow, we double the dose. I don't care if it stops his heart. In fact, that would be easier." I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was a death sentence. "Mom," Monica said, sounding slightly hesitant. "If he dies of an overdose, there will be an autopsy. The toxicology report." "There won't be an autopsy if he has a history of confusion and dizziness," Lydia interrupted. "He is 78. Old men fall downstairs. Old men have heart attacks in their sleep. It happens every day." I closed my eyes. Tears pricked at the corners, hot and angry. This was the woman I had shared my bed with. The woman I had traveled the world with. The woman I had trusted to hold my hand when my time finally came. And she was planning my murder with the cold efficiency of a butcher. But the recording wasn't over. "I am not waiting 6 more months," Lydia continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. "I have waited 20 years for this old fool to kick the bucket. I earned this money. I earned every penny by listening to his boring stories about architecture and pretending to care about his stupid charity foundations." "We know, Mom," Preston said. "You have been patient." "I am done being patient," Lydia snapped. "Gary is waiting for me." "Gary." I froze. I hit the rewind button. I played it again. "Gary is waiting for me." "He has found a condo in Boca Raton," Lydia said, her voice softening, filling with a sickening longing. "Right on the water. He says he is tired of waiting for me to be a widow. He wants to start our life. And I am not going to let Harrison's stubborn heart stand in the way of my happiness. Not anymore." I ripped the headphones off my head and threw them onto the desk. The silence of the room crashed back in, but it was shattered by the ringing in my ears. Gary. The name floated in my mind. Gary, her yoga instructor. The man she had been seeing 3 times a week for the last 2 years for her back problems. The betrayal was total. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just desperation from her deadbeat son. It was lust. It was hate. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She had been playing a long con. She had been waiting for me to die, and now that I was taking too long, she decided to speed up the process. She wanted my money, my house, my life insurance, and she wanted to spend it all with a spray-tanned fitness instructor in Florida while my body rotted in the ground. I sat there staring at the waveform on the computer screen. That jagged green line was the visual representation of my life falling apart. But then something shifted inside me. The heartbreak calcified. The sadness evaporated, burned away by a white-hot rage that was cleaner and sharper than anything I had ever felt. I looked at the family photo on my desk. I picked it up. I looked at Lydia's smiling face. "You want to be a widow, Lydia?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want to go to Florida?" I opened the drawer and took out the bottle of scotch I kept for special occasions. I poured myself a glass. My hands were steady now. Rock steady. I had the evidence. I had the confession. I had the conspiracy to commit murder on tape. I could call the police right now. They would come. They would arrest them. But that wasn't enough. That was too easy. If I called the police now, they would get lawyers. They would plead out. They would say they were joking, venting stress. A good defense attorney might even get the tape thrown out as an illegal recording. No, I needed more. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed to let them think they had won, let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff, and then push them over. I took a sip of the scotch. It burned a good, honest burn. Lydia wanted a confused, incapacitated old man. She wanted a victim tomorrow. I would give her the performance of a lifetime. I would be so confused, so frail, that she would feel safe enough to make her move. I would lure her into the trap. I saved the audio file to 3 different cloud servers. I emailed a copy to Jack. Then I emailed a copy to my estate attorney with a subject line that read, "In the event of my death, open immediately." I stood up and walked to the window. The moon was high, casting a pale light over the lawn. "Gary in Boca Raton," I murmured. I hoped Gary liked waiting. Because Lydia wasn't going to Florida. She was going to a place with iron bars and concrete walls where the only view was the mistake she made when she decided to cross Harrison Blake. I turned off the light. The architect was done planning. It was time to start the demolition. The next morning, I staged my surrender. I waited until the smell of coffee permeated the house, signaling that the vultures were gathering for their daily strategy meeting. I did not shower. I did not shave. I purposefully put on a shirt with a button misaligned and left my shoelaces untied. I shuffled into the kitchen, dragging my feet heavily against the floor tiles, letting my shoulders slump as if the weight of gravity had doubled overnight. When I entered the room, the conversation died instantly. Lydia was mid-laugh, a sound that cut off into a choke as she saw me. Preston and Monica looked up from their plates, their eyes scanning me not with concern, but with a cold, calculating assessment. They were checking for signs of the poison working. They were looking for the broken man they had been manufacturing. I gave it to them. I gripped the back of a chair, my hands trembling violently. I let my eyes lose focus, drifting past them to a spot on the wall. "I cannot do this anymore," I whispered, my voice cracking. Lydia stood up, her movement fluid and eager. "What is it, Harrison? What is wrong, my head?" I mumbled, rubbing my temples. "The noise, the confusion. I feel like I am losing my mind. Lydia, I woke up this morning and I didn't know where I was for a moment. I am scared." I saw the look that passed between them. It was electric, a mixture of triumph and relief. They thought the drugs had finally broken the dam. They thought the old mule was finally ready to be put out to pasture. I continued, pausing to take a shaky breath. "I think I need professional help. I called Dr. Evans this morning. He suggested a week at the Pines. They have a neurological evaluation unit. I think I should go today." The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it screamed volumes. The Pines was an assisted living facility in the suburbs. It was expensive, sterile, and exactly the kind of place where families parked their elderly problems so they could forget about them. Preston was the first to speak. He stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin to hide his smile. "Dad, that sounds like a very responsible decision. The Pines is excellent. You need round-the-clock care that we just can't provide here." Monica chimed in, nodding vigorously. "We just want you to be safe, Dad. If you think that is best, we support you 100%. Lydia walked over and hugged me. It was a stiff, performative embrace. "Oh, Harrison," she cooed against my shoulder. "You are so brave. We will take care of everything here. You just focus on getting better. Don't worry about the house. Don't worry about the bills. We will handle it all." "I bet you will." I thought, feeling the revulsion rise in my throat. "I bet you will handle it right into your own pockets." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of faux efficiency. Lydia packed my bag with the speed of someone disposing of evidence. She threw in my pajamas, my slippers, and a few changes of clothes. She did not pack my books. She did not pack my photos. It was the luggage of a man who was not expected to return. While they scurried around, I managed to slip into my study one last time. I grabbed the burner phone and the small go-bag I had hidden behind the bookshelf days ago. It contained my real essentials, the backup drive with the audio recordings, my passport, and the key to the physical safe deposit box at the bank. I slipped the small bag inside the larger suitcase while Lydia was distracted picking out a tie I would never wear. By noon, the car was waiting. Preston insisted on driving. He wanted to be the one to deliver the package. He wanted the satisfaction of driving me out of my own kingdom. I sat in the passenger seat of my Cadillac, watching my house disappear in the rearview mirror. Preston drove with one hand on the wheel, tapping his fingers to the radio. He was humming. He was actually humming. "So, Dad," he said as we merged onto the highway, "once you get settled in, maybe Monica and I can bring some paperwork by later in the week. You know, just to make sure the bills get paid while you are indisposed." I looked at him. I looked at the side profile of the boy. I had tried to raise the man who had turned into a parasite. "Let's just get me checked in first, Preston," I said, my voice weak. "I can't think about papers right now." Sure, he said quickly. "No rush. You just rest." The drive to the Pines took 40 minutes. When we pulled up to the grand entrance with its manicured hedges and fake colonial columns, I felt a chill. This was the waiting room for death. For many of the people inside, this was the last address they would ever have. Preston grabbed my suitcase and walked me to the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with a kind smile, greeted us. "Checking in," she asked. "Harrison Blake," Preston announced loud enough for the lobby to hear. "He is here for the evaluation week. Dr. Evans sent the referral." I signed the papers with a shaky hand. I let Preston guide me to the elevator. I let him walk me to the room on the 3rd floor. It was a nice room, I suppose. Beige walls, a view of the parking lot, a bed with rails. Preston put the suitcase on the bed. "Well, Dad," he said, patting my shoulder. "This is it. You are going to be safe here." I looked at him one last time. This was his chance. One last chance to show a shred of humanity. One last chance to say, "Dad, come home, we will figure it out." "I will tell Mom you are settled," he said, checking his watch. "Call us if you need anything. But maybe give it a day or two before you call. Give yourself time to detox." He meant give us time to raid the safe. "Goodbye, Preston," I said. He turned and walked out the door. He didn't look back. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I waited until I heard the elevator ding. Then I waited 2 more minutes. The transformation was instant. I stood up straight. I rolled my shoulders back, shaking off the posture of the invalid. I walked to the door and locked it. Then I opened my suitcase and took out the go-bag. I left the pajamas. I left the slippers. I took only what I needed. I checked the hallway. Empty. I didn't take the elevator. I took the fire stairs at the end of the hall. I walked down 3 flights, moving with the purpose of a man on a mission. I exited through the rear emergency door, which I had rigged earlier with a piece of tape over the latch during a bathroom break. Upon arrival, a trick I learned from a general contractor years ago to bypass job site inspections. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air behind the facility. A gray delivery van was idling near the dumpsters. The side door slid open. Jack was sitting in the driver's seat wearing a baseball cap and eating a sandwich. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Delivery successful?" he asked. "Package returned to sender," I replied, climbing into the back. The interior of the van was cramped, filled with surveillance equipment. Monitors were bolted to the walls, glowing with green and black feeds. The air smelled of electronics and stale coffee. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. "Drive, Jack," I said. "Take me back to the neighborhood. Park in the spot we scouted." We arrived back at my gated community just as the sun was setting. Jack parked the van on a service road that ran behind my property, separated by a thin line of trees. It was close enough to see the house through the leafless branches, but far enough to remain invisible to anyone inside. We sat in the dark watching the house through high-powered binoculars and the live feed from the camera Jack had installed in the attic vent. For the first hour, the house was quiet. But then, as darkness fell, the transformation began. It started with the lights. Every light in the house was turned on. The chandeliers in the foyer, the sconces in the dining room, the floodlights in the backyard. My house was glowing like a cruise ship. Then came the cars. A convertible pulled into the driveway, then a sports car, then another. People I didn't know. People who looked like they belonged in a nightclub, not a quiet suburban street. Then the music started. I could hear the bass thumping all the way from the van. It was a low rhythmic vibration that seemed to mock the beating of my own heart. I raised the binoculars. Through the large bay window of the living room, I saw them. Lydia was wearing a red dress I had bought her for our 10th anniversary. She was holding a champagne flute, laughing, her head thrown back. She was dancing with a man I didn't recognize, a younger man with tanned skin and bleached teeth. Gary. It had to be Gary. He had flown up from Florida faster than a vulture spotting a carcass. Preston was there too. He was at my bar, my mahogany bar that I had hand-polished, pouring drinks for a group of strangers. He was holding court, gesturing wildly, playing the role of the wealthy heir he had always pretended to be. Monica was in the corner showing off the house to a group of women, pointing at the art on the walls, as if she were pricing it for an auction. They weren't mourning my absence. They were celebrating it. They were celebrating my demise. They were drinking my liquor, dancing on my floors, and toasting to the fact that the old man was finally locked away in a padded room. I lowered the binoculars. My hand gripped the cold metal so hard it hurt. "They think I am gone," I said to Jack, my voice low and dangerous. "They think the castle is theirs." Jack looked at the monitor, his face illuminated by the ghostly green light. "They are sloppy, Harrison. Look at that. They didn't even close the blinds. They are broadcasting their guilt to the world." "Let them have their night," I said. "Let them get drunk on their victory. Let them feel safe, because when the hangover hits tomorrow, it is going to be fatal." I looked at the house one last time. It looked beautiful from the outside, but I knew the rot was inside. And tonight I wasn't the architect anymore. I was the demolition expert, and I had my finger on the detonator. "Get some sleep, Jack," I said, leaning back against the metal wall of the van. "We go in at 2 a.m. When the music stops, the real show begins. The digital clock on the dashboard of the van blinked 2 a.m. The last sports car had peeled out of my driveway 20 minutes ago, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The house lights were still blazing, a beacon of their arrogance, but the movement inside had stopped. They had retreated to their bedrooms, drunk on champagne and the thrill of their coup. I looked at Jack. He nodded once, checking the battery on his handheld camera. We did not speak. We did not need to. We slipped out of the van and moved through the tree line, crossing the manicured lawn I had paid a landscaping crew to maintain for decades. The grass was wet with dew soaking through my shoes, but I did not feel the cold. I felt only the heat of the reckoning that was about to arrive. We reached the back patio. The glass sliding door was locked, the security bar in place. Amateur hour. They thought locking the doors would keep out the man who built the walls. I moved to the old oak tree near the garden shed. I knelt down and dug my fingers into the soft earth at the base of the trunk. 3 inches down, my fingers brushed against a small, watertight plastic box. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a brass key. It was not for the doors. It was for the service entrance to the mudroom, a lock that was purely mechanical, bypassed by the electronic system entirely. I inserted the key. It turned with a smooth, silent click. I pushed the door open, and we stepped into the mudroom. The air in the house was stale, smelling of spilled wine, stale perfume, and something else. The smell of invasion. We moved silently into the kitchen. It was a disaster zone. Empty bottles of my best scotch littered the counters. Crystal glasses were shattered on the floor. A half-eaten pizza sat on my antique dining table, grease soaking into the wood. Jack started filming. The red light on his camera was the only judgment they would face tonight, but it was damning. He panned across the wreckage, documenting the desecration of my home. But this was just the surface. I signaled Jack to follow me. We moved through the living room past the sleeping form of a man passed out on my sofa, Gary. I assumed, though, in the dark, he just looked like a lump of spray-tanned flesh. We stepped over him like he was trash. I led Jack to the library. This was my sanctuary. The place where I had designed skyscrapers and hospitals. The place where I had retreated when the world got too loud. I walked to the built-in bookshelves that covered the east wall. To the untrained eye, it was just a collection of first editions and architectural encyclopedias. But I knew the secret. I reached up to the third shelf to a thick volume of The History of Roman Engineering. It was a book I had hollowed out and rigged to a spring-loaded latch mechanism 30 years ago. I pressed the spine of the book. There was a soft thunk followed by a hydraulic hiss. A section of the bookshelf 3 feet wide swung inward. Jack's camera was steady, but I heard him inhale sharply. Even he, a man who had seen war, was not prepared for what was behind the wall. The dead space I had mentioned was not empty. It had been colonized. We stepped into the narrow corridor between the walls. It was lit by a battery-operated camping lantern that cast long, eerie shadows. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fast food. On the floor lay a queen-sized air mattress, deflated and stained. Piles of dirty laundry. Preston's gym shorts, Monica's yoga pants were kicked into the corners. Empty buckets from KFC and wrappers from Burger King were stacked like a leaning tower of filth against the studs. But that was not the horror. The horror was the desk they had set up on a crate. On the crate sat a laptop and 2 monitors, and on those monitors were live feeds. One screen showed my bedroom. The camera was positioned high, looking down at my bed. They had watched me sleep. They had watched me change. The other screen showed the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom. I walked closer, my legs feeling like lead. Taped to the wall next to the monitors were notes. Handwritten notes in Monica's bubbly script. Tuesday, 8:00 a.m. Target took blood pressure meds. Seemed steady. Wednesday, 7:00 p.m. Target napping. Preston entered room to check wallet. All clear. Thursday, 9:00 p.m. Target on phone with bank. Discussing dividends. Need to intervene. They had not just been squatting. They had been studying me. They had been logging my movements, analyzing my habits, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They had turned my life into a biology experiment. I felt a wave of nausea so violent, I had to grab the stud wall to keep from falling. I saw a calendar pinned up. Dates were circled in red. Move-in day was marked 3 weeks ago. The big day was circled for tomorrow. Tomorrow. The day they planned to overdose me. I reached out to tear the calendar down, to rip this nest of vipers apart with my bare hands. My fingers brushed against a bag of white powder sitting next to the laptop. Crushed pills, the vitamins they had been feeding me. My hand was shaking so hard the studs vibrated. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake them up and drag them in here and force them to look at their own sickness. I wanted to burn the house down with all of us inside. But then a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. It was Jack. He wasn't filming anymore. He was looking at me, his eyes hard and clear in the lantern light. He squeezed my shoulder, a grounding pressure that pulled me back from the edge of the abyss. "Easy, Harrison," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Not yet." I looked at him, my eyes wide with rage. "Look at this, Jack. Look at what they did. They have been watching me like a lab rat. I know, Jack said. And we have it all. Every frame. Every note. This is a slam dunk for invasion of privacy stalking burglary. It is not enough, I hissed. I want them buried. I want them to rot. We will get them, Jack said. But if you wake them up now, it is a confrontation. It is messy. They might run. They might fight. And Gary out there, he looks big. I can take him, but if things go sideways, evidence gets destroyed. He pointed to the calendar. The big day. They are planning to kill you tomorrow, Harrison. That is the charge we want. Conspiracy to commit capital murder, attempted murder. That is life in prison. That is no parole. I looked at the calendar again. Tomorrow. We need to catch them in the act, Jack said. We need them to try to administer that final dose. We need them to think you are here helpless and ready to die. I took a deep breath. The air in the crawl space tasted of betrayal, but it also tasted of opportunity. You want me to come back? I asked. You want me to let them think I came home? No, Jack said. We are going to reset the stage. We are going to leave this exactly as we found it. We are going to go back to the van. And tomorrow morning you are going to walk through that front door like a man who ran away from the nursing home because he was confused. You are going to be the perfect victim. And when they try to finish the job, I asked. Jack patted the gun holstered under his jacket. When they try to finish the job, we will be there to finish them. I looked around the crawl space one last time. I memorized the filth. I memorized the violation. I would carry this image with me for the rest of my life. It would be the fuel that kept me warm when the nights got cold. We backed out of the crawl space. I swung the bookshelf closed. It clicked shut, hiding the cancer inside the wall once more. We walked back through the silent house, past the sleeping Gary, past the shattered glass. We slipped out into the night, locking the door behind us. As we sat in the van watching the house through the monitor, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone. In its place was a cold mathematical certainty. They had their plan, I had mine. And tomorrow only one of us was going to walk out of that house a free man. The attic of my house was not a dusty storage space filled with cobwebs and forgotten Christmas decorations. When I designed this home, I treated the attic as the brainstem of the entire structure. It was a climate-controlled server room humming with the quiet vibration of the smart home hub, the security mainframe, and the central HVAC units. It was accessible only via a drop-down ladder in the master closet, which I had locked, or through a maintenance hatch on the roof, which Jack and I had just utilized. We crouched on the metal grating of the catwalk, bathed in the soft blue glow of the server rack LEDs. Below us, through the uninsulated ventilation shaft that fed directly into the kitchen, the sounds of the celebration were dying down. The music had stopped. The guests had left. Now it was just the core triumvirate of greed remaining. Jack handed me a headset connected to the parabolic microphone he had lowered into the vent. I put it on. The clarity was terrifying. It sounded as if I were sitting at the granite island right next to them. I heard the pop of a cork. Champagne. Another bottle. To a new beginning, Preston's voice slurred. He sounded drunk, arrogant, and prematurely victorious. To Florida, Lydia chimed in. And to Gary. I cannot wait to get out of this mausoleum. I looked at Jack. His face was grim. He pointed to the digital recorder spinning on the floor between us. The red light was steady. Every word, every conspiracy. It was all being etched into digital stone. Then the tone of the conversation shifted. The clinking of glasses stopped. Okay, Monica said. Her voice was sober, sharp, and commanding. We need to focus. The fun is over. The old man comes back tomorrow. We need to be ready. I leaned forward, pressing the headset tighter to my ears. This was it. Preston, did you get the syringe? Monica asked. Yeah, Preston replied. I got it from the pharmacy trash. Clean needle, though. Good, Monica said. Now listen to me. This has to be precise. When he gets here, he is going to be tired. We are going to tell him we made him a special welcome home smoothie. I am going to put enough crushed sedatives in it to knock out a horse." And then Lydia asked. Her voice held no hesitation, only a cold, impatient curiosity. Then Monica continued, her voice dropping to a clinical whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "I am going to inject him with 40 units of fast-acting insulin." "But he is not diabetic," Preston said. "Exactly," Monica snapped. "That is the point, you idiot. His body won't know how to handle it. His blood sugar will crash within minutes. Hypoglycemic shock. It will look exactly like a massive stroke or a heart attack. By the time the paramedics get here, his glucose levels will have rebounded slightly, just enough to make the cause of death ambiguous. In a 78-year-old man with a history of confusion and dizziness, no coroner is going to order a toxicology screen for insulin. They will just sign the death certificate and call it natural causes." I felt a hand grip my arm. Jack was looking at me, his eyes wide. This was not just a plan. This was a professional execution. Monica was using her medical knowledge to turn my own biology against me. "And the will?" Monica asked. Lydia let out a short, cruel laugh. "I found the old copy in his safe. The one that leaves everything to that stupid charitable foundation and establishes a trust for you, Preston. I am going to burn it in the fireplace tonight. As soon as he is dead, I will present the new will we drafted, the one that leaves everything to his loving wife. Since he is incapacitated, he can't contest it. And since he will be dead, he definitely can't contest it." I closed my eyes. The image of Lydia burning my last wishes, burning the legacy I wanted to leave for the world, burned brighter than any fire. She wanted to erase me completely. She wanted to take the money I earned building hospitals and libraries and spend it on condos and boyfriends. I took a deep breath. The air in the attic was cool, recycled, sterile. It helped clear the red mist of rage clouding my vision. I looked at Jack. He nodded. He reached into his tactical bag and pulled out a black box with 4 antennas. A military-grade signal jammer. I turned to the server rack. I pulled out the keyboard for the main control terminal. I did not need a mouse. I knew the command lines by heart. I had written the code for this house myself. I typed in my administrative password. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I navigated to the perimeter security protocol. I found the command I had programmed for emergencies, a feature I called the Fortress Protocol. It was designed to lock down the house in the event of a home invasion, sealing the doors with magnetic deadbolts that could withstand 5,000 pounds of force. But tonight, I wasn't using it to keep people out. I was using it to keep them in. Downstairs, the voices continued. "So we do it tomorrow afternoon?" Preston asked. "No," Lydia said. "We do it as soon as he walks in the door. I don't want to spend another night under the same roof as him. I want this over." "It is over, Lydia," I whispered. I hit the enter key. Clack thud. The sound was audible even from the attic. It was the sound of 12 heavy-duty magnetic locks engaging simultaneously throughout the house. The front door, the back patio slider, the garage entry, the mudroom. Downstairs, the conversation stopped abruptly. "What was that?" Preston asked. "I don't know," Lydia said. "It sounded like..." The locks, I typed another command. Perimeter shutters, engage. Outside the automated storm shutters, heavy steel panels designed to protect the glass from tornado debris began to roll down over every window on the first floor. The mechanical whirring was loud, relentless, industrial. "What is happening?" Monica screamed. "Why are the shutters closing?" "Preston, check the panel," Lydia shouted. I watched the monitor. I saw Preston running to the iPad mounted on the kitchen wall. He tapped the screen frantically. "It is not working," he yelled. "It says system locked by administrator. Mom, I can't stop it. Call 911. Monica yelled. I looked at Jack. He flipped the switch on the jammer. The red light on the box turned green. I watched on the monitor as Lydia pulled out her phone. She stared at the screen, tapping it violently. "No service," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "I have 0 bars." "Me too," Preston said. "The Wi-Fi is down. Everything is down." They were trapped, sealed inside a steel and concrete box, cut off from the world. The only thing in there with them was their guilt. And me. I typed the final sequence. This was the theatrical touch, the psychological breaker. Lighting blackout. I hit the key. Instantly, the house plunged into absolute darkness. The kitchen lights, the hallway sconces. The landscape floodlights. Everything died. The only light came from the faint, terrified glow of their cell phone screens huddled together in the kitchen. Screams erupted from below. Chaos. The sound of a chair overturning. Glass breaking. "Stay together," Monica shouted. "It is just a power outage." "No, it is not," Preston cried, his voice cracking like a child's. "The generator didn't kick on." "The generator always kicks on." I reached for the microphone that was connected to the whole house audio system. I adjusted the volume to the maximum level. I wanted my voice to come from everywhere. From the ceiling, from the walls, from the floorboards. I wanted to be the house itself. I cleared my throat. I pressed the talk button. "Hello, family," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, deep, distorted slightly, by the amplification echoing through the dark rooms like the voice of God. Downstairs, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was the silence of absolute primal terror. I leaned into the mic. "I hope you are enjoying the party." I continued, my voice calm, icy, devoid of mercy. "I heard about the smoothie. I heard about the insulin. And Lydia, I heard about the will. I saw them on the infrared camera Jack had activated. They were huddled in a tight circle, clutching each other. Lydia was looking up at the ceiling, her face a mask of horror, illuminated by the ghostly blue light of her phone. "Harrison," she whispered. "I am not in the nursing home, Lydia," I said. "I never was. I have been here, listening, watching." I watched Preston fall to his knees. Monica was backing away, looking for a weapon, looking for a way out. But there was no way out. "You wanted to erase me," I said. "You wanted to bury me in my own walls. But you forgot one thing. I built these walls, and tonight they are not my prison. They are yours." I signaled Jack. He handed me the remote for the strobe lights, another security feature designed to disorient intruders. "Get ready," I told them through the speakers, "because the landlord is home, and eviction starts now." The darkness in the kitchen was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that magnified every terrified breath my family took. They were huddled together like rats in a storm drain, stripping away their arrogance layer by layer until only raw fear remained. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, the high ground in every strategic sense, and placed my hand on the banister. It was cool and smooth, the same mahogany I had sanded myself 30 years ago. Now I whispered to Jack. I hit the final command on the control panel. In a fraction of a second, the house went from a tomb to a supernova. The security floodlights, the chandelier, the recessed halogens, every single lumen of lighting power the house possessed, ignited simultaneously. It was the anti-theft override designed to blind intruders and expose every corner of the property to the cameras. Downstairs, screams erupted again. I watched them recoil, covering their eyes, stumbling over the overturned chairs. It was a cruel, necessary exposure. There were no shadows left for them to hide in, no dark corners for their lies. I began my descent. I did not use the cane I had been faking with for the last week. I walked with the steady, measured gait of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. In my right hand, held low but visible, was my father's Colt 1911. The gun was heavy, a cold weight of steel and walnut grips that felt like justice. Beside me, Jack descended like a shadow, made flesh, his face impassive, his presence a silent promise of violence if necessary. We reached the landing. The three of them were squinting up at us, blinking tears from their eyes. The scene was almost pathetic. Lydia in her red cocktail dress, makeup smeared. Monica shivering despite the heat. And Preston. Preston was the first to recover. The shock on his face morphed into a snarl of desperate aggression. He saw an old man with a gun, and his predator instincts dull as they were told him that he was younger, faster, stronger. He didn't see the father who raised him. He saw the obstacle between him and his freedom. "You are crazy!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. "Put the gun down, Harrison. You are having a breakdown. You are going to hurt someone." He was trying to reclaim the narrative. Even now, facing the barrel of a gun, he was trying to gaslight me. He thought he could rush me. He thought he could tackle the frail old man and wrestle the weapon away before the police arrived. He lunged. It was a clumsy, telegraphed movement. He took 2 steps up the stairs, his eyes locked on the gun. I did not flinch. I did not aim at him. I raised the barrel 3 inches to the right, toward the alcove in the foyer wall. Sitting there was a Ming Dynasty vase, a blue and white masterpiece I had won at an auction in London for $12,000. It was exquisite. It was irreplaceable. I squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. The recoil traveled up my arm, a familiar solid kick. The vase did not just break. It disintegrated. A cloud of fine white dust and blue porcelain shards sprayed into the air, raining down on Preston like sharp confetti. He froze. He dropped to his knees, covering his head, a high-pitched whimper escaping his throat. The echo of the gunshot rolled through the house, silencing everything. I lowered the gun, keeping it pointed safely at the floor, but ready. I looked down at Preston, cowering in the dust of a fortune he had hoped to inherit. "I bought it," I said, my voice cutting through the ringing in their ears. "I have the receipt. I have the right to break it." I took another step down the glass, crunching under my dress shoes. "And the same goes for your lives," I continued. "I built this life. I funded your lifestyles. I paid for the clothes on your backs and the cars in your driveway. And if you think I will hesitate to dismantle you to protect what is mine, you have severely underestimated the architect." Preston scrambled backward, crab-walking away from me until he hit the wall. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was the boy who used to hide behind his mother's skirt. But his mother could not help him now. Lydia was staring at the gun, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, she really saw me. Not the checkbook, not the nuisance, but the man. "Harrison," she stammered, holding her hands up in surrender. "Please. We were worried. We can explain." "Explain?" I asked, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "Explain the insulin. Explain the fake will. Explain Gary." Her face went pale white, the blood draining so fast she looked like a wax figure. I walked past her, ignoring the scent of her expensive perfume, which now turned my stomach. I walked to the dining table where the remnants of their celebrations still sat. I holstered the gun, a deliberate show of confidence, and reached into the bag Jack was carrying. I pulled out a thick black binder. It landed on the granite table with a heavy final thud. I flipped it open. "This is not a debate, Lydia," I said. "This is an indictment." I picked up the first document and tossed it towards her. It slid across the table, knocking over a champagne flute. "Conspiracy to commit capital murder," I recited. "Class X felony. Minimum sentence of 20 years. I threw the next file. It landed in front of Preston. Trespassing, burglary, identity theft. I threw the third file at Monica. Practicing medicine without a license. Possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. Attempted manslaughter. They stared at the papers. They stared at the transcripts of their conversations. The photos of the crawlspace. The screenshots of the pill identification. You can't prove any of this, Monica whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. It is your word against ours. We will say you are senile. We will say you imagined it. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb that thinks it can debate its way out of dinner. Look at the camera, Monica, I said, pointing to the ceiling corner where a small red light was blinking on the security dome. She looked up. You thought you cut the Wi-Fi, I said. You thought jamming the cell signals would stop me. But you forgot that this house is hardwired. That camera is connected via fiber optic cable directly to a private server in downtown Chicago. I leaned over the table, getting close enough to see the sweat beading on her upper lip. And for the last 10 minutes, everything, the audio, the video, my confession, your reactions has been live streaming directly to the cloud server of my attorney, Robert Vance. He is watching right now. And so is the district attorney. The color left Monica's face. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The realization hit them like a physical blow. There was no spinning this. There was no gaslighting the cloud. They had confessed to an empty room and the whole legal world had been listening. Lydia let out a sob. A harsh, ugly sound. She reached for my hand, her fingers cold and clammy. Harrison, please, she begged. I am your wife. We have been together 20 years. Doesn't that mean anything? I made a mistake? I was weak. Preston. He pressured me. I pulled my hand away as if I had touched a viper. Preston pressured you? I asked, my voice incredulous. Preston can't even tie his shoes without instructions. You are the architect of this, Lydia. Do not insult my intelligence by playing the victim now. I looked at the three of them. The unholy trinity of my life. My wife, my stepson, my daughter-in-law. They were not family. They were a tumor I had let grow for too long. Harrison, please, Lydia wailed, falling to her knees. Think of the scandal. Think of your reputation. My reputation. I laughed, a dry, humorless bark. My reputation is built on strong foundations, Lydia, and tonight I am doing a renovation. I am gutting the rot. I turned to Jack. He was standing by the window, peering through the blinds. They are here, Jack said quietly. I listened. At first it was faint, a low wail in the distance, but it grew louder, louder. The sound of sirens. Not one, not two, a chorus of them. Lydia scrambled up and ran to the window. She saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the trees. Her knees gave out and she slid down the wall to the floor. They are coming for you, Harrison, she screamed, grasping at straws. They are coming because you fired a gun. You are the dangerous one. I shook my head slowly. I called them 10 minutes ago, Lydia, I said. I told them there was a hostage situation. I told them 3 intruders had broken into my home and were threatening my life. I told them I was armed and terrified. I looked down at her. They are not coming to check on a senile old man. They are coming to arrest the people who tried to kill him. The sirens were deafening now, filling the room, vibrating the glass. I could hear the tires screeching on the asphalt of the driveway. Doors slamming. Voices shouting commands. I walked over to the front door. I placed my hand on the lock. I looked back at them one last time. Preston was weeping silently. Monica was staring catatonically at the wall. Lydia was still on the floor looking at me with a mixture of hatred and despair. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door to the cool night air and the blinding glare of the police spotlights. I raised my hands slowly, empty, showing my palms to the officers swarming the lawn. "Officer," I shouted, my voice clear and strong. "I am Harrison Blake. The intruders are inside. They are unarmed, but they are dangerous." I stepped aside, inviting the law into my home, inviting the end of their world. As the SWAT team rushed past me, shouting for everyone to get on the ground, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The house was noisy, chaotic, filled with strangers with guns. But for the first time in months, it felt safe. I walked out onto the porch and took a deep breath of the night air. It smelled of exhaust fumes and rain. It smelled of freedom. The judgment hour was over. The execution was about to begin, and I was going to have a front row seat. The red and blue strobe lights of the police cruisers swept across the front lawn, illuminating the faces of my neighbors who had gathered behind the caution tape. They stood in their bathrobes and slippers, whispering, pointing, witnessing the collapse of the Blake dynasty. But inside the foyer, the only sound that mattered was the metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tight around wrists that had never known a day of hard labor. The police did not use kid gloves. They treated Preston, Monica, and Lydia exactly like what they were: dangerous criminals who had conspired to commit a capital offense. As the officers marched them out of the dining room, the united front they had presented for weeks crumbled into dust. "It was her idea," Monica shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate, as an officer pushed her head down to guide her out the door. She tried to twist away, pointing a manicured finger at my wife. "She told us to do it. She said she would cut us out of the money if we didn't help her. I am just a pharmacist. I didn't want to hurt him. I was scared of her." Preston, the man who had tried to intimidate me with a clenched fist only minutes ago, was weeping openly. He looked at me with the eyes of a child who had broken a window, not realizing that he had shattered a life. "Dad, please," he sobbed, snot running down his face. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will go to rehab. I will do anything. Don't let them take me." I did not look at him. I looked through him. The time for fatherly intervention had passed 20 years ago when I failed to teach him that actions have consequences. Tonight, the lesson was finally being delivered. Then came Lydia. She was not crying. She was not begging. She was raging. As the officers escorted her past me, she dug her heels into my expensive rug, fighting them every step of the way. She glared at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You can't do this, Harrison," she spat. "I am your wife. I have rights. Half of this house is mine. Half of that money is mine. You can't just throw me away because I fell in love with someone else." I stood by the door, my hands clasped behind my back, watching her struggle. She still didn't get it. She thought this was a divorce dispute. She thought this was about a broken heart. She failed to realize that attempted murder tends to void the terms of a marriage contract. My lawyer, Robert, stepped out from behind the wall of police officers. He was a man of few words and sharp suits, and he had been waiting in his car since I gave the signal. He walked up to Lydia holding a crisp blue folder. "Mrs. Blake," Robert said, his voice cutting through her shouting, "I am serving you with an emergency protective order and an immediate filing for divorce based on fault grounds, specifically adultery and conspiracy to commit homicide." Lydia laughed, a frantic, hysterical sound. "You can't prove adultery." Robert calmly pulled a photograph from the folder. It was a still frame from the surveillance video Jack had captured earlier that evening. It showed Lydia and Gary, the fitness instructor, embracing in my kitchen while discussing my imminent death. "We have the video," Mrs. Blake, Robert said, "and we have the audio of you discussing the payout with your lover. Under Illinois law, and per the terms of the prenuptial agreement you signed 20 years ago, any criminal act against the spouse forfeits all claims to marital assets. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, which, according to my records, is nothing." Lydia stopped fighting. Her shoulders slumped. The reality finally pierced her delusion. She wasn't going to Florida. She wasn't going to be a wealthy widow. She was going to be a penniless inmate. As the officers dragged her out the door, she didn't look back at me. She looked at the house. She looked at the chandelier. She looked at the life she had just thrown away. I watched the patrol cars drive away, their sirens fading into the night. The silence that returned to the house was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war is over. The air still smelled of their perfume and their fear. I stood in the center of the foyer, looking up at the high ceilings I had designed, the crown molding I had installed. It was a beautiful house, a masterpiece of architecture. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. The legal process was swift and brutal. With the mountain of evidence, Jack and I had collected the audio recordings, the video of the insulin discussion, the pill analysis, the testimony of the cleaning lady. There was no wiggle room for a defense. Preston and Monica tried to cut a deal, turning on Lydia in hopes of a lighter sentence. But the district attorney was not in a forgiving mood. The premeditated nature of the plot, the cruelty of the gaslighting, and the use of a medical license to procure a murder weapon made it a high-profile case. 6 months later, the gavel fell. Preston and Monica were sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit murder and elder abuse. Monica lost her pharmacy license permanently. Preston would be nearly 60 by the time he saw the outside world again. Lydia received the harshest sentence. As the mastermind and given her position of trust as a spouse, the judge showed no mercy. She was sentenced to 25 years. During the sentencing hearing, it was revealed that Gary, her lover in Florida, had already moved on to a new wealthy woman the moment Lydia's checks stopped clearing. She went to prison alone, bankrupt and despised by the very social circle she had tried so hard to impress. As for me, I did not stay to haunt the halls of my victory. The day after the arrest, I called a real estate agent. I told her I didn't care about the market value. I didn't care about the comps. I wanted the house sold, immediately. I couldn't sleep there. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the scratching in the walls. I heard the whispers coming from the vents. The house was a shell that had been infected, and no amount of bleach could scrub away the memory of their betrayal. I sold it to a young family from the city. They didn't know the history, and I didn't tell them. Let them fill it with new memories. Let them reclaim the space. 3 months after the trial, I stood on the balcony of my new home. It was a penthouse on the 45th floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, overlooking the vast blue expanse of Lake Michigan. It was modern, open, and filled with light. There were no dark corners here, no basements, no hidden crawl spaces, just clean lines and the horizon. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the morning sun on my face. My health had returned fully. The phantom symptoms of dementia that Lydia had tried to induce were gone, washed away by good nutrition and the absence of poison. I was 79, but I felt younger than I had in a decade. Freedom has a way of regenerating the soul. The doorbell rang. I walked to the door, not with a shuffle, but with a stride. When I opened it, Maria was standing there. She looked nervous, clutching her purse with both hands. She was wearing her cleaning uniform, humble and worn. "Mr. Blake," she said, dipping her head. "You asked to see me. I hope I am not late." The doorman, he asked me many questions. "You are right on time, Maria," I said, smiling. "Please come in." She stepped into the foyer, her eyes widening as she took in the view of the lake. "It is beautiful, sir," she whispered. I walked over to the kitchen island, a slab of white marble that had never known a lie, and picked up an envelope. "Maria," I said, "I wanted to thank you, not just for the cleaning, but for the phone call." She looked down at her shoes. "I only did what was right, sir. I was scared I was wrong." "But you called anyway," I said. "You risked your job. You risked being yelled at. You risked everything because you knew something was wrong, and you cared enough about my safety to speak up." I handed her the envelope. She took it hesitantly. When she opened it, and saw the check, her hands flew to her mouth. The check was for $50,000. Mr. Blake, she gasped, tears welling in her eyes. I cannot take this. This is too much. This is a fortune. It is a down payment on a new life, Maria, I said gently. But there is a condition. She looked at me terrified. A condition: I don't want you to be a cleaning lady anymore, I said. I need a household manager. Someone to run this place. Organize the vendors, handle the schedule, make sure the fridge is stocked with real food. I need someone I can trust with the keys to my life. And in 80 years, I have never met anyone with more integrity than you. Maria started to cry openly now. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. I felt the calluses on her palm, the map of a life of hard work. Thank you, Mr. Blake, she sobbed. Thank you. I will not let you down. I know you won't, I said. I walked back to the balcony and looked out at the city I had helped build. The wind was picking up, creating whitecaps on the lake. I thought about Lydia. I thought about Preston. I thought about the blood that connected us, the DNA that was supposed to bind us together in loyalty and love. It was all a lie, a biological accident. Then I looked back at Maria, a woman from a different country, with a different background, who owed me nothing but a few hours of labor. Yet she was the one who had saved me. People say that blood is thicker than water. They say that family is everything. They tell you to stick by your kin no matter what. But I learned the truth in the dark crawl space of my own home. I learned that sometimes the people who share your last name are the ones sharpening the knife. And sometimes the stranger who cleans your floors is the only one willing to pull you from the fire. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, clean air of the city. Sometimes family is the fire, and the only way to survive is to let it burn and walk away into the light. We are taught from birth that blood is thicker than water, that family is the ultimate safety net. But my story proves that sometimes biology is just an accident, and true loyalty comes from the most unexpected places. The people who claim to love you the most might just be waiting for their turn to cash in, while a stranger with nothing to gain becomes your only shield. Real wealth isn't the millions in the bank. It is the peace of mind, knowing the people at your table aren't poisoning your food. Never be afraid to cut toxic roots even if they run deep. A quiet life with honest people is worth infinitely more than a mansion filled with wolves. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below and let me know which city you are watching from.